rolling. Last year's 1 lakh crore, about 80% of it was unconditional, so the states could use it the way they want, provided, of course, it's used within that year and for capital expenditure. The rest 20% had all the conditions attached, power reforms and so on, one nation, one ration card and so on. This year that has been increased because of two reasons. One, we felt that there was a good appetite for more funds and continuation of the scheme. That's not possible if they didn't absorb it last year. One. Second, we've also increased the outlay. Last year was 1 and this year is 1,30,000. And this year too, it'll have a good share which will be left to the discretion of the states to use the way they want it. And also a portion of it subject to conditions, one of which is the municipality being encouraged to go for municipal bond issues, building the Unity Mall. In other words, we are also trying to have many of those schemes which we think will speed up the capital expenditure together with carrying forward the reforms. Also trying to build up accommodation for police personnel in the states. So those conditions will be laid. And actually this year we have been talking through the officials with the chief secretaries of the state governments to say that this moves fast and moves early. So my strong belief is in the month of April itself, there should be substantial number of proposals coming from many states so the release can happen straight away. A lot of these discussions have already happened as to what is the scheme, how is it tailored, how is it different, how is it different from last year, is it going to be very onerous to implement and so on. So all the differences have been ironed out and I expect the project proposals from the states to come well early in April itself. So unlike the last year, this year, it'll start rolling out faster.
May I call upon Mr. Siddharth Birla, past president?
It really feels like a business school. Good evening, madam. It's very hard to read the budget and try to see if something has been missed. I think nothing has been missed. So all congratulations to you and your team. But madam, there was one issue that FICCI had been pressing for very hard, which perhaps just escaped attention. There is a lower tax regime for people who start businesses by 2024, by end of 2024. There are some people who believe it should be extended year by year. And when we had the pre-budget meeting, FICCI had pressed hard that I think we should take a bold step and announce for 5 years this window. Because you're not going to reduce the tax because it's already at a kind of minimum. You're not going to reduce the tax. You might as well increase the period. Coming out of COVID, a lot of people are making their investment plans. Let's take an example. Even as a domestic company, if by even February 2023, if I decide to put in an investment, there is probably no chance that it will be operative before 2024 March. So, you're left in a limbo. So what happens? You prefer to actually either do away with the decision or defer the decision. So if we are trying to capture people coming in to invest in the country, maybe a longer window, maybe not 5 years. FICCI has pressed for 5 years, maybe not 5, but at least longer period could have been considered. So I think we still have time to do that if you think it wrong.
Would you like to respond? May I call upon Sandeep Somani, past president, to ask a question, please?
Thank you, Shubhakant. Madam Finance Minister, I think the only word to describe this year's budget is absolutely, it was a brilliant budget. I think you've covered all the territory and you've not left anything either for growth or for a more equitable growth. And you are actually walking the roadmap that you had shown us to the country a few years ago. My compliments to you and to your team. I just have a suggestion, madam, which is not budget related, and it's been brought to your notice. The government has been doing a lot of things in terms of ease of doing business. There is currently one constraint, unfortunately, in the CCI not being able to take decisions because it does not have a quorum. I would just recommend some early resolution to that. Thank you, ma'am.
May I? Namaskar, ma'am. Most heartening to hear your views on tourism. For the first time, really, a finance minister has taken it upon herself or himself to put such a focus on tourism. Extremely heartened to hear that there is going to be so much money put into infrastructure, whether it's airports or whether it's railways. And we do believe that it is, of course, it's a long-term thing, but it will certainly help us. So for me, it's just compliments to you and from the industry, from the travel, tourism, and hospitality industry. Thank you very much, ma'am.
So YK Modi, past president.
Ma'am, at the outset, I join President and others for congratulating a fantastic budget. There is nothing on the taxation which I have a suggestion to make. One thing, the government which you mentioned is government is continually removing unnecessary compliances and regulations, and but there is still a long way to go. So we would like to work strongly with your department and the government, give more suggestions on how to make life easier for honest businessmen. Similarly, so the point was you and the prime ministers have been saying you want to trust the taxpayers, but unfortunately there is one suggestion in this budget that if you send money abroad, which is tax-paid money, you will further pay 20%. We are told that some people are misusing, hence everybody has to suffer. I would suggest those who are misusing should be hauled up, but honest taxpayer should not run from pillar to post to be taxed again on his tax-paid income. For us, whether we stay in India or abroad, makes as long as we have paid our due taxes. I request.
May I call on Mr. Dinesh Kanabar? I think.
Ma'am, as a tax professional, we are trained to find errors and our eyes only go to say what's wrong. And in that light, I must just compliment you that there is really nothing much that one can find in the provisions of the finance bill which one would really be negative about. I have two suggestions to make, ma'am. One is we have put a restriction of 10 crores on investment into a residential house if capital gains have arisen. There are two limbs to it. One is if capital gains have arisen on sale of a residential house or other assets. And I can understand to an extent that these provisions apply to other assets. If somebody has sold equity shares, got gains, you don't want that money to be used for a residential house as a tax shelter. But extending this from one house to another may not be warranted. So for example, people have got houses, they have inherited there for a very, very long time. They're selling that house, they might make a substantial capital gain, but they're just buying another house, substituting it. And extending that to section 54 may be reconsidered. 54F one can relate to. That was one suggestion. The second suggestion, madam, which I wanted to leave with you is that there has been a proposed change of taxation of REIT and InvIT, which has caused quite a flutter. And the proposition which I wanted to make is that if there is a redemption of units, REIT units, the excess could well be taxed as capital gains, but to treat it as other income and tax it at full rate maybe is not warranted. It is really killing this industry, which after a lot of effort has taken shape and is inconsistent with how things happen globally. So I would request that this be reconsidered, ma'am.
Would you like to respond to any of these?
Yes, yes.
Right. Sunil, would you, Sunil Sanghai?
Thank you. Honorable Minister, the editorial of Times of India today, the headline summarizes what we are hearing, the sentiment here. It says, Madam Finance Minister, this is probably the best budget from 2014. And I think we all agree to that. I have a suggestion. There's no question.
I think in order to get, I think the finance minister for us to gainfully utilize the time, if there are any questions on the direction of the budget of the longer term, I would really appreciate that.
No. Suggestions are good.
Ma'am,
Please go
suggestions
on.
are definitely welcome, but we would like to hear you as well.
So the suggestion is with regard to disinvestment and the privatization. Rightly so, it has not found place in the budget speech, and the target also got reduced because obviously the market condition, etc. The privatization has two angles. It also creates the efficiency in the economy, and that does not depend so much on the market because it's a long-term privatization. You did a miracle job, brilliant job in Air India last year. That's one suggestion, that if the privatization can continue or maybe even can be stepped up, that will be good for the economy. Thank you.
Puneet?
Hello. Yeah. Ma'am, I want to also compliment you as other members on presenting a fantastic budget. I have two questions, ma'am. One is, how does it feel to present the first budget of Amrit Kal and the largest budget since the 75 years of independence, which is more than $500 billion? One. Second, ma'am, there's a huge emphasis on infrastructure building in India. 10 lakh crores of capex, 2.5 lakh crores in railways, then airports, etc. I know this government is a master of not just vision, but also execution. So what mechanisms do you have in place to ensure that all these projects get executed on time? Thank you.
If we spend a couple of months getting into details of how you're going to draft the budget, and what are the contours, what kind of investments we are talking about, and which are the sectors which need to get it, and so on. The rest of the year after the presentation of the budget goes in doing exactly what you want us to do, implement it, be after the department to say spend the money where it's been given, and also make sure that we are closely monitoring every quarter it reaches the destination where it should, or else have a difficult time with the department. I know Ajay is a very patient secretary, but he can really be very tough on departments where execution is found slow, and so on. So finance ministry's job actually is a very sweat and toil post the budget, not actually in preparing the budget. It's mostly after it. And you rightly mentioned that this government spends a lot of time executing the projects which have been, and that's where the difference between good governance and laid back approach to governance comes in. And on that, whether we do it or not, you see the Prime Minister doing it himself, and therefore no department would want to be found less in their performance. So all of us are on the toes after it. That's how it gets done.
Mr. Vipul Toli, if you have a question.
Thank you. Very good evening, ma'am. Once again, you've put energy transition really at the center of priorities, and within that, green hydrogen leading the charge. Ma'am, this is as we all know, a very, very rapidly evolving area, dynamic. Globally, things are moving very fast. In fact, one could even say that many countries are almost racing with each other to make themselves the most competitive, to be able to establish themselves at the center of this new energy. And my question is really sort of twofold in that regard. You've made some very bold commitments in the budget. Of course, before this was already preceded by the relevant ministry with the support of MOF, doing a lot to improve solvency in the sector. But as you know, countries all the way from the US, which has done its IRA, various European Union countries which are coming up with their various things at different points in time. Japan is coming out with something, Korea is coming out with something. Is there any mechanism you have in mind, or you could share with us, to make sure that India's competitiveness in this also stays abreast in this very dynamically moving sector. As you know, within 23 itself, I'm sure we will see at least 3 or 4 major exporters coming up with their sort of plans. And the second part of the question really is, would you have any guidance for industry as to whether we can play a role in helping the government keep abreast and making sure that as a country we really stay at the competitive forefront, ma'am? Thank you.
It might sound as if I'm giving my stock answer, but it is relevant answer. It is the relevant answer because industry is the one which I would put up front in any policy making. The more inputs that you share, the more ideas that you share, and the more critiques that I get from you all about how the government's policy is drafted, whether it is going to be implementable in the ground, or if there's anything falling short. It is only through exchanges such as this can we have a responsive policy being made, a useful policy being made. And therefore, the answer to your first and second question is industry is the one which has to push it. Industry is the one which has to come up with the picture which is prevailing, which is so dynamic, and which is what is going to determine how India will have to move forward. So, one, on that ground, I think the ball is always in your court. You hit it first, and then we respond. Second is, for the government to facilitate and expedite, it is necessary that we get the picture of where we have our inherent strengths, first of all. There's no point in us trying to be ahead of the curve on issues which require a lot more for us to build on the fundamentals. If some fundamentals don't exist, or we are yet not laying a ground, there's no point in responding to globally rapidly developing situations. So there's just a lot of thought which industry and particularly partners of such developments which are around happening globally, it has to be openly discussed. And also, it need not be the government to be the prime mover. It can be industry the prime mover. Then you catch up with a lot of things. How did software in India develop? The government was only doing catching up always. And today, even today, they set up the benchmark for you to understand what's happening globally. And they are the pioneers even globally. That's the kind of expectation I would have of industry. Even when it comes to the second stage of renewable energy, when you're looking at rare materials, when you're looking at hydrogen, when you're looking at ways in which ammonia can be positively converted, green ammonia, and so on. So, sorry if I sound a bit critical and cynical. Industry should look into itself for your potential and then come up with points at which you want the government to facilitate, rather than say, is the government doing anything about it? If it does, then I'm coming in. No, you started off. How did the software sector move in this country? Did they wait for the government? No, they just kept moving. And government saw that it cannot be sitting and watching and came up with, quite a few facilitating policies after that. So I would want industry to be the prime mover as regards the latest frontiers in renewable energy and as regards the latest frontiers in rare earths, materials, conversion of all these towards usable technologies.
Delighted to hear that receptiveness, ma'am. We'll certainly come back with not just both parts of what you said, which is, where are our natural strengths, where can we play, and how do we actually compete? We'll certainly follow up on that.
And just a quick comment from my side. As I said, clearly from a FICCI perspective, we will certainly look to collate suggestions and like you said, take the lead in interacting and putting our views across to provide inputs for policy making. Second, I just wanted to share is that we are actually working on a report on rare earth minerals, which we hope to have ready in the next month or so. And hopefully that will provide a little basis of conversation as to where government and private sector can work together. Because I mean, I think when it comes to issues like lithium, etc., China is already sort of, I think, far ahead. But there are no doubt other rare earth minerals which we can keep in mind and be a little proactive in that regard. With I mean, private sector looking to play a role as well. If I can call on Mr. Pranav Saita, please. He's chair of our taxation committee.
Thank you, ma'am, for the opportunity. I join everyone else in complimenting you for an absolute stunning budget. I think even your committed critics are struggling to find spots to criticize it. So that's the measure of its authenticity. And one of the hallmarks of your budget, ma'am, I have observed is the credibility of the numbers. There's nothing tried to be swept in. Very transparent, fair, and this budget is again clear on that front. One of my questions was the budget seems to project the nominal growth for financial year 24 as 10.5%. While this is nominal growth, of course, when I look at all the established multilateral international agencies, IMF, World Bank, OECD, our own economic survey, all seem to be 6% plus real growth for financial year 24. If we are projecting in the budget a 10.5% nominal growth, assuming an inflation deflator or whatever adjustment for inflation, the real growth probably has been projected at 5.5 probably. Is that a very conscious thing, conservative estimate, or are we missing something? I do understand global headwinds and so on, but the current year's growth, nominal growth, is 15% plus for the year ended March 23. So only a 10.5%, is that very conservative? And that, of course, means that it's a very credible and achievable budget. But that was my question.
I think the debate on deflators constantly on. Deflators are arrived at. Ajay, you may please come in to correct me. This has been something which we've discussed in the parliament several times. Deflators normally, finally, after all the analysis and bringing in the factors which are important, tend to be somewhere in the range of 3.5%. So you can see where we have fixed the nominal growth and what is going to be real at the end of the day. So it's not exactly the inflation number of a particular time, a particular day in a month. So the calculation goes in such a way that you normally take the deflator to be at that level. I'm sure Khanabarji has already written a lot about this even earlier, although being a tax expert. So that's the standard approach to it.
In the financial year 2023, ma'am, the nominal growth is 15% plus and the real growth is 7%. So that was probably misguiding me, but yeah.
That's fine. Yeah. You must also go back to see the flow of inflation and the other factors which weigh in into deciding what the deflator is.
If I can call on Arushi Gujral to you had a question.
Good evening, ma'am. First of all, again, I'd like to congratulate you not only on the budget, but all the steps that your government has been taking, very, very progressive steps. And one of them, of course, is the Make in India policy. And this requires the development of a lot of products and projects, and it requires a lot of huge expenditure on R&D. The DSIR used to recognize independent in-house R&D centers of private and public companies. And we used to get a weighted tax benefit of about 200% till 2017. And because of which we used to get an effective tax benefit of about 34%. But over the last years till March 2020, it's been brought down to 100%. So since we need to spend all this money on R&D, so you'd request you to reconsider taking the weighted tax benefit back to 200% because it really boosts the R&D efforts of the private segment. Thank you.
Mohit Saraf, if you'd like to ask a question, please.
Ma'am, I'm a boring lawyer, so I'll just ask one or two boring questions. We've done a lot of work on the ease of doing business, ma'am, and I think the entire thing which you mentioned about the trust-based governance and removing so many laws, basically criminalizing commercial acts and all those things, I think that's very, very commendable. And the government has been working, and we at the FICCI also have done a lot of work on simplification process. And the second thing which we always been worried about is the enforceability of contract and tax dispute. And again, there also, I think the entire provision on arbitration, I think that will go a long way to remove the backlogs, I think. Thank you very much for that.
Mr. BVN Rao.
Thank you, madam. I think many corners were thinking it is going to be an election budget, but to surprise everyone, I think it is a simple and consistent budget in line with all the last 4 years, 3 years budget with double engine growth. That is the philosophy of the government. While it is so, I have one suggestion. Before I share that, I want to respond to one of the colleagues when what is that government is doing. I echo with you that government is a catalyst, and we as business, we have to leverage. I think the initiatives you announced in the budget for the ease of doing business, many hurdles which were defined at a baseline, which is delaying the projects, is removed. I think it is very complimenting this thing, because people read numbers, but people don't sometimes miss the initiatives, which are small initiatives making big things. So that is one thing. I have one suggestion, madam. While we all focusing on capital infusion, building assets, and followed by consumption, which is the philosophy of your budget, there are some of the existing assets which are suffering. Like, for example, there are many gas power plants in the country languishing for want of gas initially. Later, the gas pricing in view of dollar parity or otherwise is going up. So environmental conscious is one of our ideology or our targets. I suggest that government should come up with some solutions for this. About almost 32 crores assets are languishing, and banks are also suffering, developers are also suffering. This is one appeal I would like to make. Thank you, ma'am.
May I come in, ma'am?
Sure, yes.
I'm representing healthcare sector. So first of all, I would like to thank you that you have actually taken care of healthcare sector. I just wish to share one thing with you, that in Uttar Pradesh, our chief minister has started a scheme that with every district there has to be a medical college. It is very good for my state. So I wish if you can, replicate the same thing in the whole nation. So it is going to be very helpful for healthcare. Thank you so much.
Mr. Sanjay Bhatia, if you have a question, please.
Thank you, President. Madam, I also join everyone here to compliment you for an excellent budget. I'll restrict myself to the excellent announcements you made for the MSME sector. I think that's something, whether it is CGLS extension and adding another 9,000 crore there, and presumptive tax up to 3 crores, and 95% refund of the performance guarantee and all during the COVID period, those who could not perform. I think these are excellent measures, and excellent MSME sector would definitely be benefited by it. The one thing which you have done, ma'am, in this is the payment as per act. I mean, you have further tried to discipline the large scale sector so that they pay in time in 45 days, otherwise it would not be allowed. I think its only thing is that how this would be really implemented. I think that's one thing which really needs to be seen. Other is the green growth. You talked about various sectors, so I'll strongly recommend packaging to be looked into that particular green growth sector, so that's a very, very important area, and it cuts across all the sectors of the industry. And similarly, for PLI, I would say that the MSMEs should also be considered in for the PLIs, because again, they cuts across all the sectors. Why I mentioned about packaging is because you see they closely work with the food processing industry, and what I mean, as they say, what IT has done for urban India, food processing will do for rural India. I think that's the kind of importance which is there, and this really needs to be considered. And lastly, is two more things which I would say that one is the amnesty scheme for customs. Similarly, when the labor courts come, I think there would be a need to have an amnesty scheme for the earlier labor laws, the cases which are pending, so that one gets a clean slate and one comes out of that. And the last one from my side is the virtual AGM. I mean, like for the board meetings, you have already done virtual. I think it would be important that the AGM should also be considered to be done virtually. So, thank you very much.
Respond on
Yes, ma'am.
one of the points that you've made, because I want to be sure if I've heard you right. Your possibly the first point that you made about the 45-day payment thing, and said you're wondering how it'll be implemented.
Yeah. No, because you see, the 45 days was already there in the act, in the MSME Act, and it was not implemented. So this is further disciplining what you have done now.
Who should be implementing it?
Okay.
Who should be implementing it? The government's intent is very clearly mentioned, not once, twice. And we've also said those who have not done it, meaning those who have not paid the MSME, may not claim any offsets that year. The government has said that. And now I'm being asked who's going to implement it. Implement what? Pay the MSME?
I think the intent there is extremely clear, ma'am, and I think
if Indian large industries don't at this point in time, given the recovery pangs that most of us are suffering, we want recovery, we want speedier recovery, don't extend that rightful deserving gesture of pay them who have delivered on services, paid them who have delivered on the goods as per contract. Within that 45 days, recovery cannot be any one sector or any big or small company's prerogative. India has to recover. Payment dues cannot be sitting locked up where you see them who are actually working together with you. And if they don't get their payment in time and the government repeats its intent, how is it going to implement? Cannot be a question. It's got to be implemented. By who? By all of us. Government departments, government-owned PSBs, government enterprises, and
as I said, ma'am, I think the intent is very clear, and certainly on behalf of FICCI, I'd like to commit that this is something that a message that we will keep on reiterating, because as you said, I think there is, beside the fairness aspect, there is also the recognition that MSMEs are inherently vulnerable to delayed payments. So, so this is something that we will certainly ensure that we repeat. Ma'am, I wanted to share one other point in the context of MSMEs. A project that we are taking up this year is to reach out to MSMEs, and the beauty about FICCI is that we are a federation because we have large numbers of associations which are invariably MSME associations. So we have a very large outreach throughout India, and I'm pursuing a project to reach out to them to understand their awareness of and preparedness for digitalization and sustainability. Because again, the inherent assumption is that the large companies either know what is to be done, or the consultants to go to ask the questions. But you know, the next years is where the challenge will be there, and they will. I think the government's intent again is very clear to help them. So we have to just understand their awareness and preparedness, and that can be the basis of policy interventions, I believe. I just come to Devin Naran. Question from you, please.
Thank you very much, ma'am, and congratulations once again for an excellent budget. I have one suggestion and one question. One suggestion is, I am in renewable energy, and to achieve the net zero targets, I think we require something like, for 2070, we require $10 trillion to come into the country, both in terms of debt and equity. While the central government policies are very transparent and clear, we are facing a lot of problems with some state governments who do not toe center's line. For example, reducing PPA price, committed price at their own will. Now, this sends a very negative signal about the country overseas. So, if there's some mechanism can be done that they honor the PPAs, that's one. A brilliant thing which you've done in this budget is mangroves. Now, I understand you can sequester carbon because mangroves sequester more carbon than any other tree. And you had announced a carbon exchange for the country, which will be a game changer because those carbon credits can be sold overseas. I know government's coming with a carbon exchange. Can the private sector also get into carbon exchange? That's one. And I know government is not very keen on crypto, but there is a methodology by which we can digitize it, and the country can have its own coin in the carbon trading exchange, which can be sold overseas. Because today the demand for carbon credits overseas is phenomenal, and that could be one of the ways to raise capital or have a bond for renewable energy projects in the country.
I think there's a room for one last question. Yes, the gentleman there, please.
Good evening, ma'am. Even being repetitive, I also join everybody in complimenting you for the budget. But I think the underlying factor is your ability to listen and grasp what you listen, which I have seen in the past interactions that we've had with you. One of the items that you mentioned in your budget speech was parts for open cell. Now, obviously, since it's part of your budget speech, I think the government has recognized the television industry as something that should be looked into. I'd just like to make a few comments. Currently, there is no bonding facility in the country. Therefore, the reduction in duty for parts of open cell will not have any immediate impact. On the other hand, the current television industry in India is only 20 million. That's against about 85 million in China. There are two reasons why we are not really reaching the potential. A large part of television industry is still having GST of 28%, which under no stretch of imagination is a sin good or a luxury good, which has led to the television industry being at least 35 to 40% coming from the grey market. And unless this volume factor comes into play, the bonding facilities will not come in India, which you are trying to encourage, because that investment is completely volume driven. And so I would like you to really see that first, actually you reduce the duty on the open cell, and when the facility for the bonding comes in, then you can create the differentiation and definitely look at the GST of 28%. It is a huge export potential, and I think there is nothing lacking in India to take on China in that industry. That's just my suggestion.
Is there anything that you would like to, any suggestions or advice for our members? Then love to hear from you.
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to interact with all of you all. Since you have specifically asked, I've always found the reports that you do on certain sectors or certain market situations or opportunities and challenges very useful. FICCI should actually proactively look at the stage of development that we are in, and also the Amritkal blueprint that the government has given, one during this budget and also through Prime Minister's speech from the ramparts of the Red Fort. And from this, the opportunities and challenges over and above what government has recognized would be a very valuable input. And for those opportunities and challenges that government has recognized, I would like you all to apply your mind and form yourselves into relevant small groups to tell us that you have identified, all right, but this is the way to go about it, and this is how your next 25 years policy should be laid upfront, be consistent, and also give us a sense of certainty in policy. So reports with this kind of a TOR spread over those challenges and opportunities which the government may have not identified as yet would actually open up a lot of conversation and also chance for the policymakers to actually come up with robust policies. So I would honestly invite FICCI to get back to the drawing board and come up with a lot of things about what the government has stated and what the government has not stated.
Thank you for that suggestion, ma'am. We will certainly take that up, and I appreciate your comments about the inputs that we provide. And like I said, I just want to reassure you that we look at the inputs that we provide as a means for policy making for the government, and the inputs that we collate, I think, has to be done not from a individual company perspective or a sectoral perspective, but what is in national interest, and that's something that's clearly something that we will keep on doing. May I now call upon Mr. Harshvardhan Agarwal, Vice President FICCI, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman ji, Honorable Minister of Finance and Corporate Affairs, Government of India, President FICCI, dignitaries on the dais, off the dais, business leaders, members of media, ladies and gentlemen.